Hello there, I'm Callum and welcome to the EU in Review, where I review the Star Wars Expanded Universe as I experience it. This time I'm going to be talking about the Ewoks comics, and this is issues 1 to 9 as I read them. So, overall, for the plot, I think it's very kiddish. I have been not as enthusiastic about reading them. It's been a bit slower, just because the plot, the things in it are very kiddish and very much like the cartoon, really. And you can interpret it as folk tales that the Ewoks would tell to the kids and whatever for some of the things in them, but it still just feels kiddish and not so good, in my opinion, especially compared to a lot of the other Star Wars stories out there, like the other Marvel run of comics and everything. So these are done by Marvel as well, but I think it's the Star Comics, as that was their children's comics department at the time. So yeah, overall plot on paper is okay. It's like the Ewoks have to go and do stuff. The dialogue is very much appealing to a younger audience, which makes sense, but I do like some of the parts in it. Like, they make some jokes and put some humour in it that is actually quite nice. The writing style is just, the pacing I find for the story is fairly high pacing as far as things happen fairly quickly, but then it's also very short. It's the comic format, so I always feel like things happen quickly in comics. The visuals I find that very much reflect the cartoon, but they're pretty good, I reckon. Like, they have the style of the Ewoks cartoon as well to keep consistent with that, and also do fairly well with keeping it consistent and doing fairly well overall. And the continuity is the big thing that takes me out of this. Like, they say you approach it with the idea of them being stories like the Native Americans telling stories of their ancestors and their spirits and things, but the continuity really doesn't, if you take it as it is, really fit into any of the other continuity of the EU, so yeah. These were all written by David Manak and illustrated by Warren Creamer as well. And if you read it, you'll know, but it's weird because it seems disconnected. And they really just wrote it for kids, for it to be kids' stories related to the cartoon. Anyway, spoiler section is my notes as I read it. So issue 1 is called The Rainbow Bridge, and yeah, what I noted was apparently the Ewoks pray. The Chief Chirper says that they should pray for Nisa to be healed, so they pray to whatever god, I guess. Logray mentions the Rainbow Bridge as the only option for Nisa, but of course you have to have some sort of tradition from the chief for the story to have more of a moral to it. And apparently there's an ogre that eats Ewoks when it runs out of eating honey. Apparently. And there's also funny how the guard for the crystal is sleeping. So the Ewok guard for the crystal to create the Rainbow Bridge is sleeping. So they have some funny moments in it. And there's a part 2 of this story called A Stone's Throw. There's little rock people called the Xandor Rockers, which I find funny. And that the ogre uses the flowers for the nectar and devastated the land, gives a nice cause and effect for why they want to stop the ogre and all that. And then there's a part 3, the end of the rainbow. The ogre appears and says he keeps the nectar because he's afraid of the dark, which I find funny. And I guess some kids would relate to being scared of the dark or whatever. And yeah, really, it just seems weird that he's afraid of the dark, so that's why he's doing what he's doing. But then, one of the Xandor Rockers jumps on Gantu, is the name of the ogre, jumps on his foot, and then causes the nectar to spill on the ogre, and then he's not afraid of the dark anymore because he's constantly glowing, which is just hilarious. The dialogue is funny in this part, it's really cool. And the crystal was destroyed, so the rocks just dig a tunnel for the Ewoks. And that they failed to get the nectar is interesting, as they worked out that it got on the flower in his bag, and then that healed Nisa. But I don't know why the nectar is needed if you can just use the flower that he got. Anyway, The closing line is a bit cheesy. You may as well say, I found it at the end of the rainbow. They have cheesy dialogue throughout it as well, which is good. And what I wondered with this is, like, will the ogre glow forever, or will he just eventually fade and then just try and dig out the tunnel bigger to get to the Ewoks again? Who knows? Issue 2 and Issue 1 and Issue 2 are also illustrated by Mary Severin, as well as Warren Creamer, so she helped out with that. Issue 2 is titled Rights of Power. It introduces Zorbian space pirates led by Captain Crag, and they use bowlers, which they call bolo slings. And it's funny how Logray makes a baby Bordock appear from some powder. It's like a cross between a pony and a cow. I thought it was funny just how it looks. And Chief Chirper names Nisa the next chief, and thus begins the next tradition for the plot, that the old elders and everything don't want to be led by a woman. Whoa. And of course, she proves herself. Because in the part 2 call to arms, she wants to join the fighting. And I expected that was how it was going to go. And the Ewoks are pretty stupid to be caught in the pirate's trap, to be honest, but I guess later on they learnt from it. And so you see a little bit of cause and effect here, which is nice, so they get caught in the pirate's trap, so they're a bit wiser against the Imperial's traps, I would assume, later on. And part 3 is the fight to the finish. And Nisa is the one that got them together to build traps. So I'm to assume this type of ingenuity is what led to the traps to defeat the Empire. Because Nisa gathers all the women, because all the men went out to fight the pirates and all got trapped. And Nisa's the one that said, okay, let's use our arts and craft and create traps to stop. And the parts where they get the pirates into the traps is funny, and the commentary is funny, the dialogue's funny, they make good jokes. And the Ewoks also have birthday cakes, somehow. Random facts appearing in them. I guess I want to make it relatable to kids as well, so they have a bit more of that sort of thing in it. But birthday cakes, Ewoks have them too. Issue 3 is written and illustrated by the same people. It's called A Flight to Danger. So the harvest ceremony is on this time, and basically it's to get wood for the hang gliders. And of course the 3 Ewoks that are the main focus of these comics is Wicket, Nisa and Tebow. And they are chosen to go on the adventure, because who else goes on adventures in these comics, honestly. And part 2 is the Devil Beast. It introduces Quarks as the enemies, and a Devil Beast looks like a pterodactyl basically, which is funny. Because they basically just went, let's put a dinosaur in it, but call it a Devil Beast. And then part 3 is In the Den of the Quarks. And after threatening Nisa to get the Ewoks to make a glider for the Quark King, they make them fight by saying the smartest should be first. And they all think they're the smartest, which I think is interesting, because they do the mind games with the Quarks, so that the Ewoks can get the upper hand, of course. And I love how it has a whole hang glider dog type fight type thing with the Devil Beast. That's actually a cool idea, isn't it? And the little jokes in these are entertaining even as an adult as well. And the funny thing with the hang glider is also when the Quark goes to use it, the Quark King, it falls apart, and so they can't chase the Ewoks, and the Ewoks get home with their wood. So it's cool. Issue 4 isn't illustrated by Mary Severin either. It's just by Warren Creamer, and still written by David Manek. Is In the Valley of Evil. It's interesting how they encounter an exiled Ewok that doesn't seem to have fur on his face. And the story is basically that he wants to do survival of the fittest for everyone, and he was exiled for being warlike. Which I think is interesting, because there's also Treek back in the Old Republic that is also very warlike, and I feel like he would have been exiled as well, and that's how it got to make his way off planet, off the moon of Endor and all that. Part 2 is The Deadly Game. It's interesting how they use the environment to their advantage, and it reminds me of Return of the Jedi in that way. And then part 3, Chase to the End, is throwing a beehive in the serpent's mouth. It's funny, I thought. Pretty simple plot line for this one, because it just went, oh, we gotta defeat the bad guy. And so they did that. But they do have some interesting bits and pieces when they're chased by the bad guy and all that to keep some attention, at least for kids and that. Issue 5 is The Terrible Machine. They basically have elephants with dinosaur ridges, and they call them Funas, which I thought was funny. All the names are funny. And aliens are hurting them for deforestation. It seems like they wanted to target deforestation with the kids this was written for. And then the baby Funa that Wicket and Nisa meet is called a Dooney. Dooney. It's a Funa. You're gonna have your Dooney and your Funa. Anyway, they're funny names. It's fun how they go, one man's weapon is another person's crutch. And apparently the Dooney's back is scaly. And part 2, the Discovery, they find some alien ship. Aliens would be the pirates or whatever. The aliens are blatantly abusing the Funas, making them obvious bad guys, because of course when it's a kid's book you can't have grey areas, you gotta have obvious bad guys, using whips on the Funas. And it's interesting that they're using Dooney to control the alpha female, and it makes sense. It's so nice how they do that. And part 3 is the battle, which the harvester was the main point I wrote down here. Is the harvester is just a box on a treadmill with a blade in front of it that was deforesting the whole world and chopping down trees, which I thought was fun. Issue 6 is titled The Ice Demon. What was interesting about this is Wicket steals Logray's magic staff, and of course he's a kid and mucks around with it. And yes, there's magic in these books, in these comics. And Logray is the shaman or the magician, and he's trying to teach Wicket at the start. It introduces Stagor, an ice creature imprisoned by Logray sometime in the past, which is interesting. And then part 2 is the Icy Trap, where Stagor brainwashes Wicket or takes control of him with the magic. Now, what I wonder about this magic is how the power connects to the Force, as their magic in Star Wars would also be connected to the Force. And there is also Dathomirian magic, so maybe this is a different sort of magic based on how they use the Force. But on the flip side of that, these don't seem to be as much in continuity, but more like folk stories that they would tell with magic and everything in them, so don't think about it too much. Also, Stagor is like Midas but with ice, because everything he touches turns to ice. And then it has the third title, appropriate, is called The Touch of Doom. It has some funny interplay between Stagor, Logray and Wicket. The battle has interesting different ideas rather than just straight out power battle between them, because they start using the environment and everything. And Stagor is defeated by water. Because everything he touches turns to ice, the fire crystals that Wicket was playing with earlier, so they do the thing where they show him trying to do something earlier and use it later on as a plot twist sort of thing. The fire crystals melt the ice above him and drop on him, causing all the ice around him to freeze and trap him. And the "I'm freezing" dialogue reminds me of the Wizard of Oz, "I'm melting." This is funny. And it ends with Wicket choosing not to follow the path of studying magic, which is interesting because in Return of the Jedi, of course, he doesn't know magic, he's just a warrior with a spear, and they don't really show magic at all. But if he did choose to study the path of magic, then we may have seen more interesting stuff in regards to the Ewoks in Return of the Jedi. Issue 7 is titled The Perilous Laughing Spell. And on the cover is Mount Sorrow. So before I read this comic, I'd heard about Mount Sorrow. It's one of the things people criticize about the EU, but of course, these comics are obviously not as much in continuity as other comics and all that stuff. Like, basically take it as an infinity story is what I do. And it's also very similar to the older Marvel run in the fact that they didn't pay as much attention to continuity before 1991, and so you got to take that into account as well. Tebow does poetry, which isn't in any of the previous comics, which is funny. And Tebow gets the laughing spell from sticking a feather in his hat, somehow. Part 2 is A Near Riot. So basically, Tebow goes around, ruins people's works, and then laughs, and they laugh, and it passes on this laughing spell sort of thing. But Tebow's the one mainly affected by it. He leaves, and they wonder why they laughed, which is an odd idea, but it makes for some good comedy parts, I guess. And he got the laughing spell from the loony bird. Funny names. And of course, Logray tells him to go to Mount Sorrow, so here we go on the journey. Tebow does have some funny lines, like while on a leash he barks like a dog, and it is funny. He laughs as infectious. And moving the mountain is part 3. The mountain doesn't seem to grasp the situation when he says Tebow isn't worthy, because Tebow's affected by the laughing spell or whatever, and yeah. He says that at first, which causes more issues, and then the mountain is affected by the laughing spell during this. Somehow the mountain can get affected by spells too. Of course, somehow the mountain's alive and speaks and cries, so yeah. So the big thing with Mount Sorrow that they say about, that Logray says about, is that the tears have healing stuff. So you have to make him cry, and his teardrop will heal Tebow, or break the spell at least. Then Tebow saves his friends and the mountain sees it, and so Mount Sorrow shouldn't know that he was under a spell earlier, but he didn't. And people say that Mount Sorrow is one of the worst parts of the EU. I was thinking about that, but in the context of these comics, it makes sense. These are stories that will probably be told to young Ewoks for life lessons, etc. Like I said, folk tales. And Mount Sorrow isn't any more wacky than other things in this comic series. Like, we have Funars and Dooney. And we have a half cow, half donkey thing. And we have all this other stuff like magic going around as the main thing. It's like, and you're worried about a talking mountain. Anyway. Issue 8 is titled The Eye of Krieger. And it introduces an evil witch who is called Morag, and she has little demon minions, which are actually pretty funny. They make funny noises instead of speaking proper words, which is funny. And then alive again, of course the Kriegon is resurrected from the eye, the witch gets the eye and whatever, and he looks like a Cyclops dinosaur, which is funny. And then part 3 is the beast goes wild, and Morag gives off Wicked Witch of the West vibes. And it's cool how the Kriegon falls into a pit and becomes the Kriegon Fire Beast. So it actually evolves from falling into the pit, which is cool. And it's like, the Kriegon was defeated by a blast from Morag after the Ewoks tricked her. Bit of a bummer they didn't have more space to have the Ewoks actually defeat the Kriegon themselves. Because I know it was to finish the comic earlier, but like it almost could have been given more space for the Kriegon to have a bit more of a battle with it. And then issue 9 is titled The Underwater Kingdom. And apparently they have criffing dragons. It's cool, but obviously meant to be a fun kid's story. Yet, like I said, Mount Sorrow, well, they have dragons. Of course, we got Crate Dragon and Tatooine in that, but still. The way these are, they're just direct dragon. And they also have little mer people that are the same size as the Ewoks. And they also go into these different types of pearls, which is a neat idea, as the little mer people eat pearls. Part 2 is titled Danger in the Deep, and it introduces Orkan, which really just looked like an adult of their species, so I don't know why they called something different. But Orkan's the main bad guy anyway. And Orkan plays the classic villain by demanding their food, then stealing the red pearl to make himself powerful, because the red pearl apparently has special properties that allows the food pearls to grow. The Ewoks fashion makeshift helmets out of bubble plants that just happen to be there. What a coincidence, but yes. And they ride across between a seahorse and a sea lion, seal, which is weird. And then the last part of this one is titled The Ultimate Sacrifice, where they talk and wait. I thought they talk to each other and waste the air in their helmets because they'd have limited air because they're just made out of the bubbles, but anyway. and he faces the devil serpent, and it has a laser beam that comes out of its head tentacle thing. It's like, okay, it does that. And Orkon is defeated when they steal his trident from him to control the devil serpent, which makes sense. And it ends with the blue pearl being stronger than the red one somehow for the food, even though they haven't really tested it properly or given it enough time to be able to know this actually does work properly. But yeah, that was issues 1 to 9, my thoughts on those comics. Honestly procrastinating about reading more of them just because they're so kiddie and I can't get as into them as some of the others, but hey, I'm plugging along. And that will be all for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Uru!